And it's that time of week once again. Our resident lawyer, Despina Priala of boutique law firm Priala Legal in Runaway Bay, with us every Thursday to offer her legal expertise. And thank goodness she's here by providing some general advice on the latest hot topics. Of course, having experience spanning more than 25 years in the area of property and commercial law, she joins us now. Morning, Despina.
Good morning, Wayne. Good morning, Brooke.
Good morning, Despina. So, first up, we've had a listener write into the show, and the question reads, is it really legal for our government to force businesses to bar perfectly healthy customers from places to get food, supplies and entertainment? Perfectly healthy people who live in towns with 0 cases just because they've not been injected with drugs that carry no liability for injury, unlike other vaccines. Is that legal, and or are there laws that protect healthy people and businesses from such division and discrimination? Laws to protect shops from enforcing such a divisive and crippling mandate. The safety and need for these vaccines is an entirely different subject beyond the scope of this question. I must emphasise this question relates to turning away healthy customers. Must we? Despina, can you please help us? And that is from Whistler, a listener in Yamba, New South Wales. So what do you take from that, Despina?
Well, Whistler, you've certainly thrown up a lot of issues there, and we will do our best to talk about those. Thank you, Whistler, for sending it in, and I hope you're listening this morning. I think it's important for us to go back and talk about the stages of COVID. I like to see life, I suppose, in that way. Being a lawyer, we sort of try to have a regulated system that we live by to a large extent. And the way that COVID's developed, I see it as a development in society. Mm-hmm. And when I've gone back, and I did do that when I got this question, and it allows you to reflect, I suppose, on what's happened in our society because of COVID. If we can do that and spend a few minutes, I think it'll be beneficial for Whistler and perhaps other listeners when I'm trying to answer this question for people out there in society, and they might have the same thoughts but just haven't really got a handle on it. And I suppose we're all trying to get a handle on what's happening in society. If I start with, I call it stage one. Stage one, of course, was, well, we have a pandemic. COVID's here. And then we all had to deal with, well, what does that mean and what's going to happen to us, individuals, the society as a whole, the states and the country itself. So we dealt with that. Immediately we saw lockdowns being in place. We saw doctors coming out and giving their opinions, and we had assessments and advice being provided at a state level and a federal level. And we immediately saw, because of the lockdown, that we had the economy that was going to be suffering because businesses were being shut. And then we sort of moved to the next stage where I view that as the vaccination policy stage. So we've sort of come through where we've got to this stage where it's certainly been recognised that there needs to be a vaccine. That was detected earlier on last year, and that finally we have a vaccine in this country and other countries have it. And then we're going through the stage of a vaccination policy, and we still see lawful directions and orders being issued state by state about what's happening in our continual lockdowns. We go through lockdown phases, we come out of lockdown, and then we have quarantine issues, we have testing issues for individuals. We have seen through this vaccination stage some new laws come out where certain industries are now mandated, where people have to be vaccinated. And we're still going through those stages now on the rollout of aged care and childcare, for example, and other industries such as construction, which is coming through the woodwork now, where people will have to be vaccinated. And then we have an abundance of new laws and lawful directions that are issued on a state-by-state basis. Some are consistent, some are not. And we're moving through, and we continue to move through that phase where we now get to another phase, and sort of all merged in together, I suppose, because we're still continuing with previous issues such as lockdowns, previous issues such as border shutdowns and border restrictions, and that's still ongoing. And we're trying to get to the end of the year where some freedoms can come through again. But now we have some debates coming through about, well, we've had debates and laws about going to public places, having to wear face masks, checking in on a QR code. Do we have to? Do we not? We've discussed it on the show before, the laws that have come about and how does that apply to everybody, and what about the medical exemptions, for example, about wearing face masks, and we've been through all those.
Yeah.
And through that, if you remember, we found that New South Wales is quite different to Queensland,
Yep.
for example. Yeah, so we had to learn about those new laws. And of course, We've now got debates coming out about the freedoms that people want to get to, and what does that look like, and what does that mean, and how do we get there, which means we do have to have a double vaccination to be able to get this vaccination passport. And what does that mean in terms of entering public places? Does that mean, as I think Whistler was getting to, where can I be refused entry now if I'm not vaccinated? That's the question that we want to get to, and we want to answer that as best as we can. But if we continue talking about the stages we've gone through where we have this continual debates, we have other issues such as constitutional claims and threats of claims that are coming through now because of the border shutdowns. For example, state and federal laws. We've got a terrible situation at the moment that many listeners might be themselves in, and that is the family court versus the state laws. So you've got the family court in situations where you've got parenting orders, where you've got split families where the parenting orders were one parent has the child 1 week and another parent has the child the second week, and there's this alternate system going. But unfortunately, you've got each parent living in different states. So therefore, those federal laws and parenting orders under federal legislation that were passed, for example, now are not being complied with because of a state law and locking down borders. So therefore, you've got a potential constitutional issue there, because you've got a federal law inconsistent with a state law, and the law under the Constitution, Section 109, says where there is a federal law that's inconsistent with the state law, the federal law applies, not the state law. So we've got all these ongoing issues we've got to deal with. And now, to answer perhaps Whistler's question, we get to this point where, if I go into a public place now, if I want to go to a cafe, if I want to go to a shopping mall or a shopping centre, can I be refused entry? Is that where we're headed? And I guess the answer to that is that, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you view things in life, we are going to head into that direction. And we've already seen, for example, in Victoria, announced recently, mandatory vaccination will be put in place for people to enter pubs and restaurants and cafes.
Do you think that there's going to be some, there will be court cases. There will absolutely be court cases around this because there's still quite a deal of pushback. There are still quite a lot of people. I mean, I know we're up towards 80% first dose vaccination, but that still means more than 20% of people who have yet to roll up their sleeve for vaccination number one. We'll never get to 100, which means that there's always going to be some people who, for one reason or another, are not happy with the way things are. And some of those will end up in court. So are we going to see... this is obviously going to take some time before it all gets sorted out, isn't it?
It is, and we're trying to get to a new sense of normality, and what does that look like and what does that mean? And that's going to be hard. And we're trying to get to this COVID resilient community, and we all have to get to a point where we just learn to live with COVID, because COVID will be part of our daily lives for a very long time to come. And you can't eradicate it. You can't turn it into something less threatening and less scary. It is what it is. And we just have to get on with living in a society, and everyone, I think, has to get to a point where the government's trying to act reasonably at all times. So if we go to this question, for example, can we be refused entry? Now, we can look at it, and as lawyers, we always play devil's advocate. We look at it both sides of the spectrum. So on the one hand, you might say people should have the freedom and do have the freedom, I suppose, to choose not to be vaccinated. At this point in time, it's not mandatory across Australia, for example. Okay, but then by the same token, shouldn't it be the case, and I say that business owners then equally should have the choice and the freedom to refuse entry to those who are not vaccinated on the basis that they are trying to create not only a safe workplace for their staff, which is a workplace health and safety issue, and you wouldn't want employers to be seen to be breaching those laws, because they've got that risk of breaching those laws if the work environment is not safe for their workers. And also to create a safe haven or a safe place for people to come and spend their time, such as a restaurant, a pub or a cafe. Yeah. And businesses are only going to make those decisions, I would have thought, based on the evidence put before us as a society by the officials and what they consider to be reasonable. So I say at the end, as long as a business owner is acting reasonable given the current laws in place, and not making decisions based on a bias or on a discriminatory level, which we'll talk about in a minute, then perhaps those decisions are the right decisions. And it's interesting, the question Whistler put was that, and referring to healthy customers and perfectly healthy people. And I would say, look, I don't know what you mean by that term, and I don't really know what a healthy customer looks like, because I say, does it mean that someone's unvaccinated and not positive for COVID? Or does it mean perhaps someone that is positive but just is asymptomatic and looks healthy? You've got a lot of variables there when you're using the term healthy customer. And I think people need to be careful about throwing that term around about what a healthy customer looks like, or what does that mean in our society?
Yeah, for sure, because my thought process there, and I could be wrong, but when I read it, Whistler's question, I thought, okay, so obviously referring to not being vaccinated and not having COVID-19, so no vaccination, but you don't have COVID or even the flu. But in that case then, so say if you are perfectly healthy in that sense, how do you prove it? Would you then have to show a COVID test, a proof of a COVID test? Because then that just opens a whole nother can of worms for a business owner. They can't do that, and people can't continue to do that.
No, and it's unreasonable and it's impractical. And that's why if we move towards a vaccine passport society, you can understand it'd be so much easier, so much more streamlined. In Queensland, I know that once you get your second jab, you can have a stamp and a card, and it's called the vaccination passport. So, and that's what people should really be moving towards, I suppose, in terms of those freedoms, to then go to a place and go, yeah, I'm vaccinated, here's my passport, no problems. But I suppose in some situations people can't get vaccinated. So what can we do about this moving forward, and what does the law say? And I think we always have to go back to the law, don't we? And at the moment, for example, we have the Fair Work Act and we have anti-discrimination laws, okay? So and there are protected attributes under the laws for people in the workplace under the Fair Work Act, and of course anti-discrimination laws about what can and cannot occur in society, in the workplace and just in general. So when we look at those protected attributes under those pieces of legislation, we're talking about things such as race, colour, sex, sexual orientation, age, physical or mental disability, marital status, religion, pregnancy, political opinion. So all of these can be considered protected attributes, and there isn't a protected attribute yet, whether or not there ever will be, for people that are not vaccinated. So there's no protected attribute based on a no vaccine person, for example.
I see.
And so if you know that, you can't call it discriminatory, because there's no protected attribute for this basis. If someone was refused entry to a public place based on one of those protected attributes, then of course it is potentially discriminatory. Here, you've got a situation that refusing entry to someone who's not vaccinated is not discriminatory at its core, at its base here, unless you can prove that there is an unlawful reason for refusing entry based on those other attributes, for example. It is what it is, where business owners have to take these precautions and make these reasonable decisions.
Yep. So what you're saying, of course, is that this is very much going to be part of our daily lives in the not too distant future. I
think so, because when you think about it going into public places now, you've got examples where you're already refused entry for other reasons, such as no thongs, no singlet. If you go into pubs or nightclubs, you can be refused entry if you're intoxicated to a nightclub or a bar. And there's sort of interesting indirect issues about whether there's discrimination or not. But say, for example, you had a restaurant that required everyone to enter through a set of stairs. Obviously, those that would be in a wheelchair would be disadvantaged, wouldn't they?
Exactly.
And that would be called indirect discrimination. But I don't think that you can apply that to a situation in the current society we have, where we're moving towards a vaccinated country, where if businesses say, look, I'm not going to allow people to come in because they're not vaccinated, and I'm making a reasonable decision based on current laws and what the medical profession tell us and what the state and federal government tell us, I think that's reasonable. I'm acting reasonably to protect my place of business and my place of work for my staff.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fair call.
That is Despina Priala from Priala Legal. And coming up next, a new change coming for the certificates of title for property across New South Wales. More on Talking Law coming up next.